If you have one PoE device in your home network that you would like to provide power to, or if you have multiple PoE devices but they're not located near each other, you might be in the market for a PoE injector. When it comes to PoE injectors, it's very important that you select the right one for your home network, otherwise your PoE devices won't work properly. The process of selecting a PoE injector is what we're going to be talking about today. I'll walk through the different considerations you should have when selecting an injector, so that way you can get the right one for your home network. With that, let's dive right into the process. The first and most important question you need to answer for your PoE injector is what version of PoE does it need to support? The reason that this is important, starting at a high level, is that depending upon the PoE device that you need to power, it's going to have different requirements in terms of how much power it needs. So depending upon that power requirement of the device, you'll need to get a different version of PoE injector that at least matches the power requirement of your PoE device. So how do we go about doing that? Well, thankfully, the powers that be have made this simple for us. And they've done that by establishing 3 different standards for PoE. They've established PoE, PoE+, or PoE++. And each of these standards, if a PoE device is made to one of these standards, it will have a certain requirement of power that it needs to have in order to be powered on. And all you need to do is you just need to make sure that your PoE injector at least matches the PoE version of the PoE device that you're implementing. I've made an entirely separate video breaking down the 3 different versions of PoE, so that might be helpful to check out if you want to get a better understanding of this. Some common examples of devices in the PoE version that correspond to them: if you have a simple Internet of Things device or IoT device, like a doorbell for example, those are usually PoE devices. If you have a Wi-Fi 6 access point, like I do here, a wireless access point such as this will most likely require PoE+. When we're talking about more complex devices like Wi-Fi access points that are used in office buildings, or we're talking about complex lighting systems, more industrial equipment for example, those will require PoE++. A good rule of thumb is if you're setting up a PoE device in your home network, if you get a PoE+ injector, that's going to cover you for the vast majority of PoE devices. With that said, you should verify what version of PoE your PoE devices are, just to be safe. Another reason why defaulting to a PoE+ injector is the fact that PoE versions are backwards compatible. So if you get a PoE+ injector and you use it to power a simple Internet of Things device like your doorbell, you're not going to have any problems. Basically what happens is the PoE version of the injector, say it's PoE+, that establishes a maximum power that the device is able to deliver. If it needs to deliver less power than that, you're not going to have any problems. And that's why PoE versions are backwards compatible. The next important consideration you should have when it comes to your PoE injector is how much bandwidth or internet speed it supports. This is most important when it comes to wireless access points. It's less important with other devices, which I'll talk about in a second. But let's think about what's happening here with wireless access points. When you're providing PoE to a wireless access point, you will then have devices that are connecting to this device and accessing the internet. There's a lot of data that will be passed between the devices connecting to your wireless access point and your router and the internet. So you need to make sure that you can support all this data being passed through the device. This is why it's important to make sure that your PoE injector can support that bandwidth or internet speed. When we say bandwidth or internet speed, we're basically just talking about the amount of data that can be passed through your injector to your wireless access point and then to your devices, and then obviously in the other direction as well. As I mentioned, there's a big difference in the amount of data that's passed through an injector that's powering on a wireless access point compared to an injector that's powering on, say, your doorbell. That's why this is most important for wireless access points. A good rule of thumb here is to make sure if your PoE injector can support 1 gigabit per second, you'll probably be in pretty good shape. For more complex wireless access points, you can see bandwidth requirements up to maybe 2.5 gigabits per second at this point, but you'll just want to double check with your Wi-Fi access point. I would say in the vast majority of cases, 1 gigabit per second is probably sufficient for your PoE injector to support. But just keep in mind that if you want to take advantage of those full bandwidth requirements of your wireless access point, and you also have an internet plan that supports that bandwidth as well, maybe you want to get a PoE injector that can support higher levels of bandwidth. Just as an example and to highlight my point here, this Wi-Fi 6 access point can support 1 gigabit per second of bandwidth, so I just need to make sure that my PoE injector supports at least 1 gigabit per second of bandwidth. Another thing to consider is if you're not powering on a Wi-Fi access point, you still might want to get a PoE injector that supports 1 gigabit per second of bandwidth, just in case you want to use that PoE injector for something else in the future, or your PoE device needs change over time. From what I've seen in my searches online, most PoE Plus injectors support 1 gigabit per second, but you just want to make sure that you check that box before you make a purchase, just to make sure your bases are covered and that you can support those bandwidth requirements if you need them. The third important thing you want to consider here when buying a PoE injector is what brand you want to get. As a reminder, with PoE, we're providing power to devices through our PoE injector, so you probably don't want to take any chances when it comes to the reliability of the device. What I mean here is you're probably better off getting a brand that's known to be reliable and has a good reputation when it comes to home network devices. For example, TP-Link Omada, that's the injector that I have here. This is a reliable brand. In addition to that, people say really good things about Ubiquiti PoE injectors. Those are two brands that are known and recognized, so you know you can't go wrong by getting an injector from them. I'll include a few examples of PoE injectors I recommend in the description. They're all PoE Plus injectors and they all support 1 gigabit per second, so those check all the boxes that we talked about today. When I was doing some searching around Amazon, I saw some brands that sold really inexpensive PoE injectors. That's not to say that they're cheap and they don't work. I'm just saying that I don't recognize the brand, so I don't trust them as being as reliable as a device that TP-Link Omada or Ubiquiti would put out. From my perspective, it's worth it to spend a little bit extra on a known brand that might be a little bit more expensive because you know what you're getting, as opposed to buying the cheapest device out there who's made by somebody that you're really not familiar with. In summary, I think you'll be happy with your PoE injector and you won't have any problems with it if you make sure that it supports PoE Plus, it supports at least 1 gigabit per second of internet speed or bandwidth. And lastly, if you get it from a reliable brand such as TP-Link Omada or Ubiquiti. I'd love to see in the comments section if this video helped you pick out a PoE injector, and I'd love to hear which one you picked out for your home network. As always, thanks for checking out this episode from Network from Home, and we'll catch you on the next one.